Good afternoon, and welcome to this webinar hosted by the Department of Criminology at the University of South Florida. I'm Lori Friedel, a professor in the department, and I will be your host and moderator. This webinar on policing and social justice in Tampa Bay is part of the nationwide discussions that emanated from the killing of George Floyd and the demonstrations that followed. And let me admit that when I first saw the George Floyd video and the national outcry, my thought was, deja vu all over again. We have a killing of a Black male. We have outcries in the form of demonstrations, calls for change, repeat. But then it started to seem different. We saw more people of every demographic involved in these discussions. Pollsters documented changed views on the part of majority populations about the experience of people of color within the criminal justice system. We saw what appeared to be wider and deeper calls for change. And importantly, these calls came not just from the masses, but from police leaders, including the leadership at TPD, other Tampa Bay chiefs, the Florida Association of the Chiefs of Police. Before John Lewis died in July, he saw something different than deja vu. He said, "This feels and looks so different. It is so much more massive and inclusive. There will be no turning back." So we are here because there is no turning back. And the Department of Criminology, probably like a lot of you, wants to be a part of the change process. The purpose of the webinar is to articulate the issues, but more importantly, to discuss the ideas and prospects for strengthening social justice in Tampa Bay. Now, to get us started with the webinar, we are honored to have Mayor Castor, who will give us some opening remarks. As I expect most of our webinar audience knows, Mayor Castor served for 31 years in the Tampa Police Department, including as its chief from 2009 to 2015. She was elected mayor in 2019. Regarding our topic and the events of this summer, she provided leadership for the discussion in Tampa about police and social justice, and she was a leader among mayors across the nation this past summer, helping to produce the Mayor's Conference report on police reform and social justice. So Mayor Castor, thank you for being here. I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Friedel. It really is an honor to be here and to be able to open up this very thoughtful conversation. It's so nice to see the individuals that are involved here. As you indicated, it's been said that there's no turning back, and I hope that that comes to fruition, that we continue to move forward, make advances in partnership, law enforcement and the community together. It's critically important, that partnership, and we have continued to travel down that road here in Tampa and in the Tampa Bay area. One of the things that, as you said, sort of that repetitive action that we have seen in the past, and an individual loses their life, there are protests, and then we go back to business as usual. And we're not going to allow that to occur here in the city of Tampa or in the Tampa Bay area. And it's so nice to see the younger generation involved, because they are the future in our community. And they're not just those individuals that come out and scream loudly and then disappear, because there aren't any easy solutions here. So I applaud Justin Coffey and I applaud KJ Sales, both of whom I know very well, and everyone else who is involved in this effort to make positive change, to affect positive change in our community. Also, thank you to USF. Thank you to you as well, Dr. Friedel, and to Dr. Fox too, for overseeing the Mayor's Task Force on Policing, where we brought the diverse voices together, including law enforcement, to define the police department that we want here in the city of Tampa. And again, that needs to be a collaborative effort. And it's not a simple task. If it were simple, it would have been done in the past. And so it is going to take a great deal of work, and there's never going to be any simple answers to this. We have, as many people have said, asked our police department to do too much. Whatever societal ill arises, I've got Dessa, the office dog, in here. Whatever societal ill arises, and we don't have a neat cubbyhole or a short answer to that, a quick fix, then we give it to the police department to handle. So we have to start by saying that we have to pay attention to those social problems that we have ignored by underfunding for decades. And that includes our educational system, it includes mental health, it includes addiction, a number of those areas that as a community, as a society, we have got to focus on. And so it's a lot more difficult than, writing defund the police on a sign and holding that up. I have stated from the beginning that I did not agree with defunding the police, because we have got to provide the social net, that safety net for our community before we pull those funds out of law enforcement. And it's not a simple budget transaction to pull dollars from law enforcement and put those over into those social issues, again, that have been underfunded. So I commend everyone on this call today. I thank you for all that you have done for our community, not just for the Tampa Police Department, but for our community, to allow us to grow as a community, and again, to define and put in place that law enforcement agency that everyone wants to see in our community. And my support for the Tampa Police Department. Having been a police officer for 31 years, I know the men and women that have dedicated their lives to protecting our community, and I am proud of them every single day. So thank you all. I know that this will be a very effective and productive time spent here, but we can't solve all of the issues today. It is going to be something that has to be worked on day in and day out for the rest of our lives. So thank you again. Thanks for allowing me to be a part of this. And thanks for allowing Dessa to make a cameo.
So thank you, Mayor Castro, for taking time out of what must be an incredibly busy schedule to share those thoughts. So let me now introduce our panelists who were chosen to represent a variety of views on our topic. Justin Coffey is a community member, activist, and law student. Passionate about civil rights and social justice, Justin is recognized as a strong advocate for marginalized peoples. Aiming to achieve justice for all, Justin has engaged in grassroots initiatives to bring necessary change to Tampa. Assistant Chief Lee Burkaw joined the Tampa Police Department in 1997 and was appointed Assistant Chief of Operations in 2020. During his 23-year career, AC Burkaw has worked in all 3 patrol districts, the Criminal Investigations Division, and Internal Affairs Bureau. He holds a BS in Criminology and an MA in Criminal Justice Administration, both from USF. And in 2016, he was honored by our department as an outstanding criminology ambassador and added to our wall of fame. AC Burkaw is enrolled in the St. Leo University's Doctorate in Criminal Justice program and will graduate later this year. Brianna Fox is an associate professor in our department and a faculty affiliate at the Florida Mental Health Institute. She received her PhD from the University of Cambridge and is a former FBI special agent. Her research focuses on evidence-based policing, crime prevention, and the developmental and psychological risk factors for offending. She has published more than 40 articles, many in our top-tier journals in criminology. Jeria Wilds is an attorney with the Office of the State Attorney, 13th Judicial Circuit. She is the Chief of Problem-Solving Courts, which includes the Felony Drug Division, the Veterans Treatment Court, as well as the Mental Health Division. Juria is also responsible for all the felony diversion programs. Prior to her current position, Juria was a major in the United States Army Judge Advocate General's Corps, and she received her BA from the University of Pennsylvania and her law degree from the University of California at Berkeley. Unfortunately, KJ Sales is unable to join us today. Thank you, panelists, for being part of this discussion. And the audience can participate because we're going to leave some time at the end for questions. You're going to find an area on the right-hand side of your screen for submitting the questions, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. Now, together with the panelists, I developed the questions for today. During the first part of the session, we will focus on identifying the social justice issues, and in the second part, focus on ideas for moving forward. Now, the panelists agreed not just on the questions, but the time allocation for each, so they and you, the audience, will hear me when they have about 20 seconds left, and I'll be grateful if they wrap up. So we'll start with identifying the police and social justice issues that need to be addressed. And I'm going to start with you, Mr. Coffey. You were involved in the protests this summer. What are the social justice issues that took you to the streets?
So this is a very important question, and I think in order to address it most directly in transparency, I should talk about what happened Wednesday, where we see that you have domestic terrorists who were trying to perform an insurrection. They were unsuccessful, but it speaks to the two Americas. And I think that it's important to distinguish that what was going on over the summer involving the Black Lives Matter protest and what happened on Wednesday are totally two different things. And the issues that brought me to protest were not born over the summer. They were actually here before I was born, and I wake up and go to sleep in America. So I think that a lot of this stuff goes without saying, but I will give you the answers. Police brutality, racial inequality, even gender inequality. There's a lot of things about America that we need to address. And seriously, I know I'm very short on time speaking. I'm trying to speak as candid as possible because I want to speak to the people who are attending, whether it be at home or in an office. We need to come together. I agree with what the mayor had said about, having a community forum and having collaborative efforts in producing change. But we also have to focus on accountability and transparency, which I think are the two biggest things from going from here on out. And if I'm not finished with time, I'd like to continue by saying that here in the Tampa area, which is what this discussion is mostly focused on, there are a lot of people who have sacrificed their time and effort to organize, and I just want to make sure that there's going to be an avenue for them to be acknowledged. So at some time in this program, you're going to have access to their information. I will give them a shout out. Just be aware. And yes, I believe that our efforts here in Tampa are inadequate. I think that we can do better as a city, and that's not pointing the finger or blaming anyone individually, but I think that we have to really get serious. I think that there's a lack of urgency. I think that some things are done lackadaisically, and that story of the two Americas doesn't just show up at the Capitol. It also shows up here in Tampa. A lot of you may be aware of the Back the Blue mural that was created, and we see the difference between their mural that was constructed and a mural that was Black Lives Matter. So this is nothing new. A lot of people are oddly surprised about what is going on now, but this is America, and I'm willing to work on changing things, and I'm excited to work in that effort. So thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Very thoughtful. AC Burkaw, The mayor mentioned her task force that she formed, and you were quite involved in this. What was the purpose of forming the task force? Who was asked to serve? And what were they asked to do?
Thank you for the invitation, and it's an honor to be part of this important discussion. Before I answer that, I just want to take a moment to reflect on the life and loss of the Master Corporal Deputy Levine of the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office, who died protecting his community. And that was a tragic event. So I just wanted to take a time to acknowledge that. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge all the support that we have received for our Police Chief, Brian Dugan, who's currently at home battling the virus, and he's doing well and he appreciates all the support. But it's conversations like this panel, like you said, that help us understand each other's perspectives and build more trusting relationships. The conversation we're holding today mirrors similar reasons why the mayor formed her task force on policing. And Justin, I agree with you, accountability and transparency is critical for any government agency, especially a law enforcement agency. The murder of George Floyd led to understandable outrage across this entire country. And this outrage was understood and shared by honest, dedicated members of the law enforcement community. The task force was created so the residents of our neighborhood in our Tampa city could share their thoughts and feelings about the state of policing and ensure that our department was meeting every evolving standard and expectation for the community that we serve. So we put together a group of 40 diverse members of the community. They were invited to serve and provide input for the task force. They were joined by 10 TPD officers, and we selected officers throughout different areas of the department, whether it was patrol, training, specialty squads, supervision, management, and they were all divided up into small working groups and engaged in discussions on critical issues. USF played a key role in this as they were the independent reviewer, where they recorded and analyzed data and common themes raised that will help shape our next steps in moving forward. Together, these individuals formed the task force with the goal of developing common ground and strengthening the bonds of trust between the officers and the community. And I can tell you, working with Justin, I've already seen this happen numerous times, and it's just amazing to see. The relationships were built with this task force. It wasn't just Justin and I. They continue to thrive. And I actually witnessed several phone numbers being exchanged between police officers and other members. So the progress of these meetings would be measured by actionable steps developed as a result of the impact from the task force. Dr. Brianna Fox and her team developed 17 findings resulting from the work. These findings are in progress and posted on our website. Many of them we've actually already accomplished, including being more transparent with our policies and procedures and putting those on our websites for everyone to see. So as the mayor actually mentioned earlier, Dr. Fox is overseeing our process, and she has complete and unrestricted access to our agency. In summary, this task force provided a platform where voices can be heard and actionable steps can be developed to progress the trust and transparency of our department.
Thank you, Assistant Chief. So Dr. Fox, tell us a little bit more about your supporting role on the task force, and what did you learn about community concerns?
Thank you, Lori, and thank you for having me and for all the opportunities I had so far with this process. So I've had a long time commitment to the application of science and evidence-based research to policing, with the vast majority of my studies, books, and community engagement aimed at doing just that. I was therefore very honored when Mayor Castor invited me to serve on her task force on policing, particularly as I was asked to conduct research on the perceptions of police among Tampa residents and identify evidence-based practices to address their concerns. This, in my opinion, is the exact way we should be doing things, but unfortunately not always the most common practice. So to start, my team of 12 graduate students and I developed a mixed methods research design. So we wanted to conduct, this in-depth analysis of the community members' perceptions of different aspects of policing. To do this, we used the work of President Obama's Task Force on 21st Century Policing as our framework, and we focused on 5 of the 6 pillars that they had identified to improve perceptions of police and police-community relations. Based upon this, we also did a survey of the task force members, which consisted of 30 people. These were just the residents. We excluded the police officers that were from predominantly minority communities and organizations here in Tampa. I also decided to add in comparison data from a survey I conducted last summer of 115 USF students living in TPD service zip codes. The reason for this was just to increase generalizability and see how much these perceptions were widespread throughout the community. And then we also collected qualitative data through a series of 4-hour focus group discussions and then analyzed it to identify prominent recurring themes on each of these topics. So in other words, a lot of work between me and my students over the summer, but we wanted to make sure, given the size of this task and magnitude, that we really put forth the effort. We had so many notable findings from our research, so I'll just share a few that really stood out. First, the task force found that there was a moderate perception of trust and legitimacy amongst the police, but notably there was no significant differences between the task force members and the student samples on these items, with the exception of one, obligation to obey police, where the task force members rated that item lowest. Our analysis of the focus groups identified 3 dominant themes. The first was a long-standing distrust of police that, as one community member put it, comes from generation and decades of injustice. There was also a theme of fear and concern over fairness in treatment by police. This was exemplified in an exchange between a police officer and citizen that it was incredible to witness. And the officer said, he also doesn't want to be pulled over, and he understands the fear that causes when it occurs. And the community member, just said back that he wasn't afraid of being pulled over. He was afraid that he wouldn't make it home afterwards. Finally, we found a consistent theme indicating the police actions and increased accountability are needed to increase the community's trust in police. Moving to the results of Pillar 2, policy and oversight, we found the community generally disagreed that police are disciplined when they engage in misconduct, and there was a strong desire for increased accountability. In our qualitative work, another 3 themes emerged. The first was perception is reality. Now, there are many good policies and programs at TPD, but we found that the public didn't necessarily know all of these, and if they don't know them, it can't impact their perceptions. Second, the public felt that there may be double standards, as police officers who engage in misconduct who are fired then may have the slate wiped clean when they get hired at a new agency, but they felt that this doesn't happen for people who are arrested in the community. Finally, with respect to accountability, we had many great quotes, including from the TPD officers, urging us to hold officers accountable, championing the many good cops, and that intervening and removing bad cops is the correct path forward. In terms of community policing and crime reduction, we found that the task force members scored significantly higher in terms of fear of police and perceptions of dangerousness when interacting with police as compared to the college students. In our discussions with the task force members, we again found several themes. First, they consistently indicated that they wanted guardians, not warriors in the police. Many officers in the groups also strongly supported this, with one stating that police should take the time to have conversations with people and show that they're there to help. That's their goal. That's why they sign up for this, demanding and sometimes very dangerous job. Another major theme was humanizing the police and the community to build these relationships. One officer noted this was essential, that the community are able to relate to the police and that they feel comfortable going to them when they have problems. Happily, the task force rated TPD pretty high on crime reduction, and there's generally a very low fear of crime, all types of crime occurring here in Tampa. So TPD was doing really good on those items. Finally, skipping forward a little bit, Mayor Castor asked me if I would examine support for funding and resources for the police. Skipping forward a little bit, what we found was a little surprising. There was the vast majority of the task force members felt that 2 things. First, the police are currently asked to do too much, or as one community member said, they're almost asked to do more with less almost daily. And there was this sense that police shouldn't be the ones tasked with many things they're asked to do, such as responding to calls over loud music, and other entities such as social workers or mental health counselors could respond to certain calls, and that may be, quote, a really good idea, end quote. The final theme that clearly emerged was the need for police. We directly asked participants what defunding the police meant to them, and in response, it was very clear that, as one of the members said, if defund means taking away officers on the street, I don't want that. If I'm in trouble, I need you guys lickety-split. In short, while both community members and the officers overwhelmingly agree that armed officers don't need to respond to all the calls that they currently do, as one member of the community on the task force said, abolishing the police would be a catastrophe. So I'm going to discuss the recommendations and findings from all of these in just a few moments, but those are our big takeaways.
Good. Thank you, Dr. Fox. Now, Ms. Daria Wilds, from your vantage point, what are the social justice challenges in Tampa? And do they extend beyond police to other components of the criminal justice system? Do we have Daria Wilds?
I apologize. Get off mute. So first, I want to thank you for having me on for this very important conversation. And I want to answer your question first by going to the definition of what I believe social justice is, because you asked me about what are the challenges. Well, first we have to know, what does social justice mean? So social justice is justice in terms of the distribution of wealth, opportunities, and privileges within a society. And so I think the challenges, the social justice challenges we have here in Tampa are the same ones that are in probably every city across the United States of America. And I think that's because, and I will be very frank in my conversation here, we are literally one generation from Jim Crow segregation. That includes here in Tampa, Florida. My parents, what does that mean? Well, that means that my parents grew up in Tampa. They attended the only Black high school, Middleton High School. They grew up in segregation. They sat on the back of the bus and it was enforced by law. They couldn't go to the beaches because they were segregated. And anyone who knows me knows I love the Florida State Fair, and they couldn't go there either. They also attended and taught in the segregated schools here. When police came into, when African Americans were allowed to come into police departments, including Tampa Police Department, HCSO, they were not allowed to arrest white people who were committing crimes. And I'm telling you all of this, not to get you down on things, but to explain where is the anger coming from? How do we get there? What happens when we have a society that has led to this? And it means even today that I've worked at the state attorney's office since 2005, and only 3 years ago, up until 3 years ago, the state attorney's office, the top prosecutor, almost 300 employees. We worked in a building where the Confederate monument, we had to walk past the Confederate monument to go to our workplace. And when it was finally taken down by the Board of County Commissioners, it was not a unanimous decision. So I say that to say George Floyd didn't just happen. It's the history of our country. It's the history of policing, from slave patrols where it started, the modern day policing, to enforcement of Jim Crow laws, because Rosa Parks was arrested and charged for breaking the law. Do we have, you asked me also does it go beyond policing to where I work? Absolutely. It goes beyond to every element of the criminal justice system, whether that's the state attorney's office, the judiciary, the police. We have an obligation. We have a very powerful positions, and we need to use that power wisely. And I believe that we have a duty, and I'm glad to hear from the mayor that we realize we have a duty to reform the system, to speak up. But I do think it's critical for us to know where we're coming from, to know when people come to task force that you have, where are they coming from? Where's their mindset? And so with the social justice challenges, what happens in a country, in a city that has that history? Well, you have racial disparities in every component of our economy and community. Racial disparities in education, wealth accumulation because of redlining. You have disparities in job opportunities, all of that. So if you ask me what the challenges are, certainly they're beyond policing, but policing comes into that because those are the kind of things that police officers are trying to police. So that's my answer to your question.
AC Burkaw, what's this past year been like for you and your colleagues, considering the George Floyd incident, calls to defund the police, and of course, all of this was on top of a pandemic?
Well, I've never seen a year like this on so many levels, with a worldwide pandemic and a crisis of public trust with the police. Our profession and our officers have been challenged in ways that I've never seen before. The pandemic alone impacted our officers' physical and mental health. In addition, the significant workforce impacts from the positive coronavirus cases to the precautionary self-quarantines have all taken a toll on the officers. Just to give you a perspective, since the pandemic began, we've had over 146 officers with positive cases. We've cleared more than 1,300 cases through self-quarantines or medical monitoring. Never in my career have I seen a workforce impacted so greatly. Every good cop is against police brutality. However, the murder of George Floyd began this paradigm shift for our profession while dealing with this worldwide pandemic. Our society has evolved into an instant society, hampering our ability to think through issues before commenting or taking action. So this contributed to a portion of our society losing sight that police officers are humans and they need the community support in order to do their jobs effectively. Officers who were once praised and appreciated for their service and dedication were faced with unprecedented anti-police sentiment. While the Tampa Bay area may not have been impacted as severely as other major cities across the nation, there was a great burden placed on our officers who stand in solidarity against police brutality and also simultaneously dealing with the impacts of the coronavirus. Just to give you an idea, during one of the protests, I witnessed one of our young female police officers holding a line as a protester was in her face, yelling at her and degrading her and her position. She maintained the utmost professionalism for the whole duration. And I felt so horrible about it. So after it was over, I went up to her and I asked her how she maintained her composure so well. And she told me that she sang her favorite song in her head. These are there are countless other examples, including officers and dealing with other situations much worse. And it was gut-wrenching to see our officers dealing with things like this, whether it's at the police department here or across the nation. And that impacted our officers. But despite these challenges and prolonged work shifts, during these mass demonstrations, our officers rose to the challenge. Are all officers perfect? No. But there's no profession that's more noble than law enforcement, where officers endure these extreme stresses and maintain professionalism and give their lives to protect and serve their community. So to tell you how it's kind of come full circle is the other night I was in a community meeting and a statement made by a young Black female activist left a great impact on me. She told the group in a meeting that the police officers are not the problem and they do a great job. And she's working to restore the mistrust within the community. This was 180 degrees different from the message that was being publicized several months ago. So I believe we're coming full circle, but the toll that it's taken has been definitely a challenge for us as a profession.
All right, thank you. So let me transition our discussion to how we move forward to address the social justice issues that have been raised. And I'm coming back to you, Dr. Fox, because you have assimilated information from the community, including the task force members, and developed 17 findings associated with a larger number of recommendations. So please share some examples of the key recommendations that you included in your report.
Yeah, absolutely. Based upon our research on the perceptions of police among the task force members and the available evidence-based programs and policies to address these concerns, we found 17 items for Mayor Castor and TPD Chief Dugan to consider implementing as responsive reforms. I'm not going to list out all of them as we would be here for a while, but they are all available online at www.tampa.gov/taskforceonpolicing. And so there's just a few things that I'd like to highlight. My first suggestion was to implement a procedural justice model of policing, which serves to build community trust and increase legitimacy by refocusing on carrying out officer duties in a way that is objectively fair, consistent, transparent, reflective of understanding and community concerns, and treats citizens with dignity and respect. Additionally, I suggested the re-emphasis on community-oriented policing and frequent, widely available, and ingrained community programs to increase positive, non-enforcement related interactions among police and community members, particularly in highly policed areas and in schools. This includes expanded community engagement programs such as Cops Out of Cars, community cookouts, and front porch roll calls, of course, post-pandemic, increased ride-alongs, and an idea that was pitched to me by a TPD officer that we're calling reverse ride-alongs, where officers will spend time alongside community members, seeing the challenges that they face in their everyday lives, going to work, taking 2 buses, what it's like walking home at night, and what the streets are like, and when it's dark and poorly lit. And the idea is that we're turning relationship building basically into a policing philosophy. Second, I found that all departmental policies and agency data on crimes, arrests, complaints, use of force should be available for public review online in an effort to increase transparency with the community. We also emphasize the need to reduce misconduct through increased accountability and end the hiring of officers with a history of misconduct. We also found that implementing de-escalation training and tracking data on the use of de-escalation tactics would be a positive advancement. A philosophy of police restraint when possible and ensuring that protesters can safely and legally express their First Amendment rights are vital to improving our relationships throughout the community. I noted that amending the current policy on crowd management to clearly address appropriate response to different types of events, such as protests versus property damage and violence, these are very different. So that nuance is needed, and that no-knock warrants should only be used when clearly stated in exigent circumstances. In addition to being approved by a judge, they must also then be approved, every single one, by the Chief of Police. Chief Dugan noted he has never seen one occur since he's been in TPD, but in the off chance that we have one, he must approve it himself. Immediately after sharing these and other findings from our report, Mayor Castor and Chief Dugan accepted all of them, full out. And committed to implement each of the recommendations in the Tampa Police Department immediately. Notably, they also recognize the need for an objective evaluation of the long-term impact of these reforms on community relations, perceptions of police, treatment of citizens, and therefore Mayor Castor invited me to serve in this role with financial support for this research provided to me by our partners at the Tampa Bay Lightning, the Buccaneers, the Rays, and the Rowdies, all the professional sports teams, as a show of their commitment to social justice and police community relations. As she made me an offer I couldn't refuse, again, I accepted this position and will be serving in this role for the next 18 months.
Very good, thank you. Mr. Coffey, you were on the task force and helped to produce these consensus recommendations. So tell us about that experience and identify the recommendations that you think are the most important and why.
Sure. So first off, I'd like to commend Dr. Brianna Fox's work producing her research project. I feel like she executed exactly what she was asked to do. And just to speak as a member of the task force, part of what I believe, Dr. Fox, please correct me if I'm wrong, qualitative research involves recording people's emotions and feelings through focus groups in order to kind of then see what policies can be produced, and that's exactly what happened. However, as far as the recommendations that came about, I feel like a lot of them were similar to the previous task force that was assembled by the Obama administration, the 21st Century Task Force on Policing. And so this had existed, a lot of it had existed before, and it made me really question kind of why it would take so long to implement. The mayor has also mentioned how TPD has adopted the A Can't Wait policies and a lot of other policies. And I heard earlier something about, that sometimes it's just that the public is unaware. And I really want to address that really quick, if I may, about this idea of it's just a matter of perception. I wanted to dismiss that immediately. I actually take offense to it because I feel like to me, when we dismiss the calls for justice and based on a matter of perception, this is totally out of scope for me. I think that this is people observing reality and calling it for what they see. So James Baldwin has a quote saying that something along the lines of, I cannot trust what you say because I see what you do. And I believe that this is where this distrust is coming from. Dr. Brianna Fox even alluded to it earlier, that this distrust or mistrust does not come from thin air, that it's after year of injustice. So yeah, I feel like it's not just the public that may be unaware of policies, but myself, I'm just as unaware of the policy as an officer who is brutalizing one of the peaceful protesters over the summer. Because even if the policy is in place, what is your action? So yeah, maybe I got too far away from the question, but I do think that is relevant. As far as the recommendations that I see most important, transparency and accountability, as I mentioned earlier, are the two most crucial aspects of moving forward in regards to any type of policy change. As part of my work in the community, I have organized to speak in front of City Council with many members and other community organizers to address things about the gargantuous police department budget and also the lack of urgency. One of the council members, Councilman Miranda, was reading a Publix ad while people were making demands. And if that doesn't speak to how leadership is taking into account the input of the citizens, I don't know. I really feel like this is where we're coming from as far as community organizers. And that's why I chose to kind of just freestyle my answers and come honest and genuine, because there's a lot of structural things at play that work against individuals who don't have networks and connects. And I acknowledge what USF is doing right now for me to have a platform to speak. I acknowledge what TPD has provided as far as my work that I've done with Chief Lee Burkall and also Dr. Brianna Fox. I acknowledge the opportunity that I've had through
20
Mayor
seconds,
James
Justin.
Okay, and but I would just like to say, with all of that, I think that there's so much more work to be done, and that's exactly what I think we should start talking about and planning for next. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. AC Burkall, TPD's efforts to address community concerns and strengthen the relationship with diverse communities did not start this summer. What are some of the ongoing and future endeavors of TPD to address some of the social justice concerns of community members?
Thank you, and Justin, I appreciate you sharing it from the heart. And while we do have a lot of things that we're working to improve on, especially our transparency, one of the reasons I believe the city of Tampa wasn't impacted as severely as other major cities our size is the relationship and bonds that we have built over the last several decades here. And some of those successful relationship building programs include our Rich House, and Rich stands for Resources and Community Hope. This program was developed over 20 years ago. In 2000, the Tampa Police Department converted an old dilapidated crack house in the Sulphur Springs community into a safe home for kids to attend after school. We provided police officers as positive role models. The overwhelming community support and success of this program grew into the development of a second Rich House in the Robles Park neighborhood. If you're not familiar with these areas in Tampa, they're some of the most economically challenged communities in our city. One of our officers now was a product of these Rich Houses, and she volunteered there in her youth and is actually one of the mentors currently at the Sulphur Springs location. In addition to the Rich House, I'd like to highlight our PAL program, our Police Athletic League, the Bigs in Blue program, and our Citizen Police Academies. The Citizen Police Academies place our community members into training and the daily lives of our police officers. This includes reenacting traffic stops outside, active shooter situations, and using our training simulator. The Citizens Academies for adults, youth, at-risk youth, and we've even hosted one for the USF football team and the Tampa Bay Bucks, who will beat the Saints this Sunday. Trust me, they will. Just last year, we hosted an abbreviated Citizens Academy with the rookies from the Buccaneers. In addition to the experience that the officers and the players had, very candid discussions on critical issues in the criminal justice arena. The attendees always walk away with a newfound understanding and appreciation for the police jobs and what we do. And it's funny, at the graduation ceremony, we always get a kick over the videos of the taser demonstrations and the shoot, don't shoot exercises. You can only imagine how many times citizens actually shoot in the simulator when it's supposed to be a don't shoot scenario. Our PAL, our Police Athletic League, we actually developed a free boxing program to help our youth stay off the streets and build their confidence. This is for youths ages 8 to 17, and they have a great time interacting with our officers outside traditional law enforcement encounters. You can bet that the kids get a kick out of it when they get a chance to swing at an officer teaching them boxing techniques. Another great program is our Bigs in Blue, which is a partnership between the Big Brothers and Big Sisters of Tampa Bay and the Tampa Police Department. This is a mentoring program which builds the bonds and trust with our officers and our youth in another non-traditional setting. Officers would have lunch with their little at school on a weekly basis. They would eat lunch, play basketball, and even help with homework. And I think it was Dr. Fox that mentioned reverse ride-alongs. Actually, in the Leadership Tampa program, where our command staff attends, we actually go through a reverse ride-along. And I actually had one in Sulphur Springs. It was the Food Desert program. And it was a big eye-opening reverse ride-along for me, where a group of us, 4 of us, were given $100. And we had a family of 4 that we had to buy groceries for. And we had no transportation whatsoever. So we had to use the bus system or we had to walk. And I'll tell you, it took us 4 hours to get what we needed, and we were exhausted, and we brought it back. The good thing about the outcome of this is we were able to donate the food to a family in need, but it was definitely eye-opening for me to experience that reverse ride-along. The only interactions that we have with our youth can't be a traditional police encounter. The only time we see our youth can't be a domestic call or other traditional function. And some of the items that I exampled was one of many of our programs that we have. We have 50 internal and 8 partnership programs available to our community. Obviously, with COVID, that's restricted some of them. Just recently, Chief Dugan launched his Chief Advisory Team, which includes diverse community members who provide direct input to the Chief of Police regarding the perception of policing in Tampa, and provide suggestions on how to continue building trust and understanding. As Ms. Wilds mentioned earlier about understanding the history of policing, Chief Dugan is also processing and developing training for the history of policing in the nation and in the police department for our officers. And that includes bringing back our forerunners of African-American officers to talk to our current officers about what they experienced and how the department was back in the day. The long-standing mission of the Tampa Police Department is to reduce crime and improve the quality of life with all citizens. This year, we also introduced our Trust Core Value System, and that instills how we should work to accomplish the mission. And trust stands for transparency, respect, understanding, and teamwork.
Wow, thank you so much. So, Ms. Dorita Wilds, we've heard a lot this summer about defunding the police. Is that what Tampa should do? And if not, what should be done to address the current concerns that you have heard?
Thank you for that question. I've thought a lot about what this means, especially being a prosecutor, in terms of what defund the police means. And so first, I think we have to get rid of we have to have a real conversation about it, because we get caught up in the slogan. And you have people on one side indicating, we're not going to have law enforcement anymore. Who are you going to call if someone breaks into your car? And so we get caught up. What does that mean? Like, abolish the police, defund the police. And I think it's a disingenuous argument, because I think the question is, if you ask me, instead of do you want to defund the police, ask me, do you want to fund social services? Do you want to fund the community? Do you want to fund education? If you ask me those things, I'll say yes. And then we have to look at a budget, right? And we have to see, well, if I want to fund all of these things, where does the money come from? Because right now, and I think Mayor Castor said it, we ask police to do too much. So if we have people in social services that handle that problem, why are we calling the police? And I don't put it on the police. The police pick up, they get the call and they respond. We have asked the police to do everything. Every issue that we have in society, we call the police. And the police response is to respond, as they should, and then to get training on more and more things that aren't law enforcement. So they have crisis intervention training. How do we respond to mental health crisis? And we train and we spend more money and more money. When we have people right now who are not funded in our community, why don't we fund them to respond to those things? If we have a homeless problem in Tampa, Florida, how do we get out of that homeless problem? By arresting and then our office charging and convicting them. That person's still homeless. Put the funds somewhere else. So if you ask me, do I want to defund the police? My thing is, I want to fund the services that we need in this community. The police, of course, the police are going to respond to law enforcement issues. If your car is broken into, the police are going to be there, and I want them to be there. They do a very good job, in my opinion, working in the office of investigating crimes, and I want them to enforce the law. But I do think that if we have all these other issues, I think that we are not solving them with law enforcement. And I believe probably law enforcement also is not really excited about going to do a whole lot of things that they're not equipped or prepared or trained for. So that's my response to your question about defunding the police. I think that the biggest thing is that if we could please get away from the what does that mean, and talk about the real issues and be really honest, because we don't solve anything. I think a lot of this conversation and panels do that, and I get it, and I'm grateful, just like Justin, to be given this opportunity. But if we're going to have this opportunity, I want us to be really honest, where we are. Everything isn't fine. If everything was fine and every program that we had put in place at either state attorney's office or TPD was fine, we wouldn't have seen the protests we saw last summer. So everything is not fine. So we need to go a little bit deeper, because sometimes our programs just aren't enough. We need to listen to the community, and we need to figure out what we need to do. And then, as Mayor Castor said, it takes a long time, right? So yeah, it might take a long time. Get that budget out, where are issues, and let's start making sense of what we're trying to do. It helps law enforcement too. It helps law enforcement too. So anyway, that's my long-winded answer to your question about whether
I love your passion.
The police.
And let me do a follow-up with you, Ms. Wild. What is the role of the prosecutor's office in ensuring social justice in Tampa, and what is your office doing?
Well, I think that we have the same role and accountability that law enforcement does. We are not in the same agency, but they investigate the crimes, and then we charge, and we decide whether we're going to bring charges. I think that we have, and I believe this, and I've said this to many, many people, I think the Office of the State Attorney and the criminal justice system is the most powerful player in the criminal justice system, because we have the opportunity and responsibility to charge. Most cases, as I'm sure you're well aware, end up in plea deals, which means that the prosecutor has a huge, even though we don't technically sentence, we have a huge part in how we handle cases. And with that, I think we have a big responsibility to figure out how to do that. Right now, our office, similar to what I guess the mayor did, we have a racial justice work group. We meet once a month. We have people from the community. We have grassroots organizations, civil rights organizations. We have law enforcement from TPD on that racial justice work group, faith-based members. And we get together and we have honest conversations that are hard sometimes to hear, but they're important. And the outcome of that is to come up with new, real policies, real procedures to make this work. And I'm talking about charging decisions. Do we need to charge every single thing that comes in our office? Sentencing. Does everybody need to go to jail for this? Are there other opportunities? So that's what we're working at. I think we have a huge responsibility in my office to do that.
Thank you. So, AC Burkaw, for many, the discussion about defunding the police was not really about zeroing out budgets, but as Ms. Wild indicated, thinking creatively about all the things that we ask police to do and about how we might reduce or reallocate those responsibilities. So my question is this a good discussion to have? And if so, what reductions or reallocations of police services do you think are viable?
Well, I think it's a great discussion, and I think it's important that we hear from our community and understand their perceptions, what they think. And I appreciate what Ms. Wild said and Justin said. So we need to have these discussions, and we need to have the uncomfortable discussions. It's important, and we need to hear what the people of our community want and what they perceive. I think that the catchphrase of the defund the police was not what it was intended. It actually proved detrimental to intending the change, but having these conversations is where we get past that and go into what the details are. At the police department, we continually look at ways to improve our efficiency and our effectiveness. And nearly 2 decades, we've reduced our number of sworn officers by 3%, while the population has increased by 25%. Without this reduction and keeping the same ratio of officers to citizens, our budget would be nearly $47 million larger than it is now. So we try to be good stewards of our money and our budget and what the taxpayers have, and we are very progressive in it. We respond to community needs. We're available 24/7. You dial 911 on your phone, you know that we'll be there. But I get it. Police officers aren't all mental health counselors, and they don't want to go to a lot of these noise complaints. And we agree that the mental health crisis cannot be solved by the police. I support lifting this burden from the shoulders of the officers. Funding for mental health professionals who can respond for these mental health crises must be looked at from a federal and state level. We're actually looking right now at several grants, hoping that we'll get some approved. Decreasing the current police budget would, though, negatively impact the services that are provided to the community. And by limiting the funding of critical needs such as de-escalation training, community programs, and crime reduction initiatives would be severely impacted. Moreover, this would make it more increasingly difficult to invest in the recruitment and hiring of the next generation of police officers. Reduction and reallocation of services, funding, personnel training, these are all conversations we need to have. However, spontaneous knee-jerk reactions, which are not thought through, actually end up costing us more money. And we're beginning to see examples of this now popping up across the nation. A recent survey through PERF, the Police Executive Research Forum, found building trust in the community as police officers, that's the police officers that they're surveying, it's their #1 priority. And their top request for training included the ICAT training, which is integrating communications and tactics training. That's proven to reduce use of force, and those are additional costs to cover that. So that is actually the #1 recommendation from the officers to PERF, is to get that training and help with expenses. Another area we could improve in marketing our ability to communicate our actions actually costs money, and technology for our transparency costs money. Body-worn cameras, anonymous tip lines, and text messages, they all are additionals to our funds. For example, our body-worn program of 650 cameras cost us $1.6 million a year. So reducing the budget would be counterproductive. However, I support increased funding for mental health, for drug addiction, for homeless. And I think through these conversations, we can help go and move forward in finding a way to better address some of those concerns.
Thank you. So, Mr. Coffey, you are an activist. What does or what should activism look like?
Well, activism can look like many things. As we've seen, people took to the streets, they've organized marches. In particular, since KJ is not present, I would like to acknowledge his efforts. KJ and I went to school together, kind of from the same area in a way. And I thought it was impactful, the large crowd that he was able to draw, and you know, having his son out there to show what it looks like when people come together. Because speaking for me personally, my first protest that I ever attended or rally was after the death of Trayvon Martin, and I remember what that felt like, going out there and being with people who were in pain, but transform that into a powerful moment to call for change. And that was back in 2012. Here we are today, obviously, but I think that it's important for people to see what is real. And moments like that are extremely real. And so people can organize, take to the streets. That way you can volunteer, you can donate to other organizations' efforts. Harness the power of social media, you know, live streaming about, you know, your plans for the community, what your moves are, attending the demonstrations, educating yourself and others about social justice issues, and of course, looking inward and examining your own beliefs and habits, and having that critique to say, what can I do better? Where can we come together and really move forward? Because at the end of the day, it's more about focused efforts. The end goal, at least in my eyes, and I believe in most people's eyes, is where do we go from here as a nation, unified as one people? And so I think that we really have to work towards that goal. That's why I've made sure to reach out to our local government. This is who we have in positions of power now. And there was a willingness, or there is a willingness to provide a platform and also assist in certain efforts. I just want to see more, and I expect more, truthfully. So, yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you. That was great. So, Amanda, do you have any questions for our panelists from the audience?
Hi, yes, thank you everybody for submitting your questions. I do have a few. I'd like to get started actually with one directed to Justin Coffey. What role do you think that the criminalization of poverty plays into policing in Tampa Bay?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it applies to the role that it plays in America in general. It should not be a crime to be poor. As a human being, it should not be a crime. And I've heard from the mouth of the chief of police, Brian Dugan, that he's acknowledged that it is a crime to be poor, that people are thrown in jail and they can't afford their bail. And I think that is so shocking to me that you can make that assessment and realize it. But I feel like there's just a lack of advocacy against it. Not to say that there is no will or effort to change it, but you got to be vocal and also put action towards it. I think that, yeah, if you're hungry, that should not result in death. I know that back in October, there was a death of a community member, Dominique Mulkey. He was shot and killed by the police. There was a weapon involved. But I feel like there was a lack of de-escalation. These are real issues that we have to address, because this was someone who was taking food, you know. So I think that that's the idea, is that it's not focused on just one issue about, you know, corrupted systems or inherently racist in systems, but it also is about righting every wrong in society, which is the way that we should go. That you can't just poke your finger in one hole because the water will come out the other, or whatever it is. So we have to address this holistically. Ms. Daria Wilds did an amazing job talking about how pervasive these issues are. And so I think that if we all come together and really sit down and plan for this, we can do something amazing in Tampa and allow that to be a blueprint for the rest of the nation.
You are so inspiring. Amanda, is there another question for our panelist?
Yes, this one is actually for Dr. Fox, Dr. Brianna Fox. When it comes to police accountability, some police unions and government officials nationwide have documented resistance to accountability and transparency. Where is the resistance coming from, and how are you addressing it?
That is a good question. The biggest, I think, impediment to accountability, I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this, maybe from the police unions. I think there's a lot of bureaucracy and red tape that comes along with that, and an effort to represent the police officers. And I've spoken, with Mayor Castor about this, and I think there's some efforts that we do want to put forward and implement, but there's, this resistance perhaps by the unions. I did not get that perception from, Mayor Castor and from the people at Tampa Police Department when we were discussing issues relating to accountability for misconduct, for enhancing the early warning system in terms of looking at patterns of issues that may be, minor at first, but we want to identify and make sure they don't turn into major issues later on in a police officer's career. So we didn't get pushback locally, but I think that it could be the unions that may be most pushing back on this and causing the most amount of resistance.
Thank you, Dr. Fox. Amanda, is there another question?
Yes, ma'am. I have one for AC Burkholm. What is the role of social workers in these reforms, and how can they support Tampa PD and our city?
Another great question, and spot on with what we're talking about. Social workers, they're not there 24/7, and the police are there 24/7. And I think the best thing that we have now going is the 211 line through the crisis center, to where at least you can get someone on the phone. But we're trying to work towards bringing that out to where we can have social workers out in the field. So that's one of the things that we're researching, especially with mental health. And actually, Justin and I have been working closely on researching a plan that will be best for Tampa in dealing with a mental health crisis. So currently we are working with the mental health community, whether it's Baycare, Grace Point, DACO, ACTS, and USF, in coming up with a solution and a step forward on how to bring the social workers more involved in the current concerns. So we would like to see them out in the field more and helping to lift the burden from the police officers' shoulders.
Very good. Amanda?
I guess sort of piggybacking off of that question for Dr. For AC Burkholm, are the requirements to become a police officer changing?
Yes. Well, changing, they're always changing and evolving, but some of the more recent changes that I can think about is just past drug use or tattoos. Things like that have evolved and changed over time, to where the time that you've used marijuana isn't like what it was when I came on. And tattoos aren't, as long as they can be covered up, isn't something that's going to prevent you from getting a job. So the hiring requirements are evolving, and they continue to evolve.
Very good. Amanda?
Yes, this one's actually for any of the panelists to answer. Criminal justice is local and involves more than just police officers. So how does systematic racism impact the larger Tampa Bay area criminal justice system, and how do we address that?
And I'm going to suggest Jaria. Are you willing to take that on, Ms. Wilds?
Yes, I can take that on. I think it's what I was talking about before when I was talking about the history. Systemic racism weaves its way into our society in all different ways. And I think it was Justin that talked about the criminalization of poverty. So I'll take an example that's easy. We have the crime of driving on a suspended license. And that means that at some point your license was suspended. And I'm not talking about for a DUI, I'm talking about for financial reasons. And if you have more money, you can pay. And then if you don't have money, you still have to get around and you make the choice to drive, but our transportation's not the best and people are trying to work and so on. And then you get arrested. And then there's fines and fees and different things that go along with your arrest. And it builds. And that's really what the criminalization of poverty means to me, is that there are certain crimes that impact other people, and those people may be disproportionately don't have the wealth that other people have because of systemic racism. So it's not something that's as obvious. It's not this obvious thing like you read a police report and they arrested the person because they were, you know, African American or Latino or something like that. It's not that. It's the system that we have. What we have to do is recognize it. So how do we fix it? We recognize it, and we say, does this person need to be in this system? We come up with other programs. But the first thing is to recognize it. I think everyone, it's uncomfortable, I think, for people to talk about this. It's uncomfortable for people in my office to talk about it. I think it's just an uncomfortable thing to acknowledge. But I think if we don't acknowledge it, how the heck are we ever going to fix it? So I think we just need to have the tough conversations, really honest conversations about systemic racism and how it does affect it. And then we can start to make those changes.
Oh, thank you so much for that. Now, what I would like to do, I shared originally that I thought that the George Floyd events and the aftermath was deja vu, but John Lewis suggested that this time is different. Each of our panelists, you've really got just about 15 or 20 seconds, and I'll start with Justin. But what are you feeling right now? Discouraged, hopeful, frustrated, cautiously optimistic? Justin, in a couple of seconds, how are you feeling?
I come forth as a concerned citizen, foremost, I would say. But at the same time, I am optimistic because I see the work that's being done in the community. I'd like to give a quick shout out to Tampa Bay Activist Network, the People Safety Coalition, Tampa Food Not Bombs, which they provide mutual aid and survival programs assisting the houseless and the hungry. I am very optimistic about their efforts and the change that can be done by the community.
And AC Burkhaw, just in a few words, how are you feeling?
I am also optimistic, and these conversations, you know, while they happened in the past, they weren't as frequent and they weren't as opened. And because we're having these open conversations and we're listening with open ears, we want to hear, we're moving forward. And I'm very optimistic, and I see things going in a positive direction, and I'm excited about it.
Very good. Jaria Wilds, how are you feeling?
You probably wouldn't know it based on my comments during this webinar, but I do feel good. I feel good because we are having the conversations, and they are very difficult. We're having them in my office internally with other groups, but we can't just, you know, to me, like write down a proposal and a policy and say, so we fixed it. I think it goes beyond that. We have to keep moving forward, but I feel good.
Good. And Brianna Fox?
I'm feeling very determined, determined to try to make this change happen, determined to implement evidence-based policy and evaluate it, to keep this collaboration that we've got together going, and of course, to come together to make as much meaningful change as possible as quickly as we can.
Very good. Thank you. So this brings us to the end of our time, and my thanks on behalf of the Department of Criminology to Mayor Castor and to our panelists, Mr. Justin Coffey, Ms. Jaria Wilds, Assistant Chief Burkhaw, and Professor Fox. You have inspired us with the work that you do. And let me close by thanking our audience members and challenging all of you to be a part of strengthening social justice in Tampa Bay and beyond. And let me close with the words of Martin Luther King, who advised us, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." Thank you and good afternoon.